Well, welcome to our town hall. This town hall is sponsored by the numbers guy, Ron Stoffel, and Citizens About Responsible Education 281 Care. I'm your host, Sheila Qualls, and I write about education for Alpha News, which is Minnesota's largest conservative news outlet. And I've produced a 5-part audio podcast series examining education in Minnesota. It's called Trapped: Chaos in the Classroom, and you can find it at that's Mike November, trapped.com. And I spent 6 months examining education, public education in Minnesota. And in this series, I basically just paint a picture of what is happening in our schools, because we believe that many parents have no idea what's going on in our schools. Our kids go there every day. They're sucked up into this vortex of school, and parents have no idea of what's going on. And so I paint this picture not through my words, but actually through the words of teachers and parents and students who are actually in these systems every single day. Thousands of Minnesota families are actually trapped in a system. They're held hostage by this system that's being shaped by misguided values and policies and practices that are at odds with traditional values in our country. I believe if most parents knew what was going on, they would absolutely not agree. So thank you for joining us for our town hall. In this section, we're going to be talking about academics and the actual academic decline in Minnesota. A lot of people say, COVID caused it. And I believe what's happening pre-COVID, I believe COVID actually just exposed what was actually going on. So we hope to answer questions and inform our audience with information so that they have tools to then approach their administration and their school boards. So again, joining me on our panel tonight, we have Matt, Shannon, Aaron, and Sam. And Matt is a school board member in Anoka Hennepin and a father of 2. Shannon is a mother and a teacher with 20 plus years of experience in public education. She's taught in elementary and middle school, both in mainstream classrooms and in special ed classrooms as well. Then we have Aaron, who is a father. He and his wife have children in the Anoka Hennepin district, and they've had children there since 2013. And they currently have one in elementary, one in middle school, and one in high school. So you've got them on all levels. And then Sam, who is a student who is finishing up his sophomore year at Anoka Hennepin. So thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Standardized test scores are the lowest that they have been in our state in decades. A recent report exposed 19 schools in Minnesota that didn't have one kid that was proficient in math, not one. And only 42% of our kids are proficient in reading, or they're reading at grade level. Missing deadlines, flunking tests, they go without penalty, because kids, from what I understand, can take the test over and over and over until they can guess enough answers to actually pass the test. Which I think is really sad. But yet in our state, graduation rates continue to climb, and our education budget gets bigger and bigger and bigger every single year. And so, Matt, we'll start with you. Why do we continue spending more and more on education, and the results get worse and worse?
Well, a number of things are at play, but I think one big thing is that schools have taken on more things, I'll just call it things, than at any time in the past. So the budgets of schools don't just include the cost to do education, as we might all think, but there are tons of other programs, that schools provide. Schools more and more are seeing themselves as the provider of, of everything from the first meal of the day to the last meal of the day. A lot of different services. There's been discussion of, even having, psychology or different, all of these types of things that are happening in schools. And so a lot of the programming, a lot of the dollars get spent on these other things that aren't core, what you might call basic educational functions. And I think time and energy and effort is being spent in those places too, which is distracting from the primary mission of what schools used to be about. If you think about at some time when a school day was filled with nothing but class after class after class, today a lot of people in the system aren't part of that structure. They're doing something else, and so I think that's part of the reason why.
Yeah, a lot of our kids they're just being cheated out of a basic education. just the basic knowledge of things that they need to know. And most parents don't know. Most parents have absolutely no idea, because what's happening in our schools, it looks a lot like education, but it's actually really not. You know, we pack our kids up, we give them their backpacks, their lunches, you know, whatever, we send them to school, and they come home with stuff in their backpack, and they've been there all day. So it looks like education, but it's not. And the lines between teacher and parent, as you were talking about how we provide everything, have definitely been blurred. Schools lack accountability. They lack boundaries. And educators, our education system is just willing to sacrifice a whole lot of stuff for ideologies. Education Minnesota, our state's teachers union, they basically prioritize a lot of these ideologies and agendas over actual education. So we have social emotional learning, critical race theory, which they say is not really critical race theory. It can be called lots of different things. Comprehensive sex education. A lot of these things are being prioritized over the actual education of our kids. So Matt and Shannon, I'm going to ask you each to just provide sort of a brief overview of these ideologies and what are some reasons why parents might be concerned. And so we'll start with you, Shannon, and we'll start with social emotional learning.
Social emotional learning is when you take students and exploit their greatest need and their greatest weakness to belong and put them in high pressure situations and ask them low level questions that could kind of pertain to all students, and so those are quite harmless. But eventually, somewhere down the line, the envelope gets pushed against values that students and parents hold in their home, but students are caused due to the popularity or the unpopularity of their beliefs to go along with the group in a way that their families and that they have been raised might not otherwise have done. And so it's really almost a mind control situation. I will say that it's inauthentic, and it's propped up, and it's contrived, and it appears as if the end purpose is to form that child's response to an acceptable one by the group or the teacher. And it's extremely uncomfortable. And it's a bullying situation, for a lack of a better term.
That is probably one of the better explanations that I have heard of that. You know, a lot of parents have absolutely no idea what it is, because you hear, oh, social emotional learning, that's going to teach my kid to be empathetic and to be kind and to be a good person, and parents go, well, hey, that's a great thing, why not? You know, but that's a great explanation.
Choosing. It is cornering children and making them choose and publicly choose the group's values.
Wow. So Matt, I will let you take comprehensive sex education.
Yeah, comprehensive sexual education is getting more and more attention. But I mean, the basic idea is that, you know, children need to be taught much more about sexuality than what I think we might have all traditionally, you know, thought that those classes were about. We know that when I was in school, sex education was focused around a few things. One was the physical changes to bodies that are happening as children go through adolescence and puberty and all of those things. So that was traditionally taught, and then what I might call sort of the academic or the scientific, you know, facts of life, as they used to call it, but the, you know, human sexuality from sort of the, you know, the body perspective and those different things. So I think the focus in the past, it was always uncomfortable for, I think, everybody involved in teaching it in schools to children who were adolescents, but it was trying to give children the understanding, the background, the education they needed to understand how all of those things worked. Comprehensive sexual education wants to go much farther than that, and wants to try to influence children's attitudes and understandings about sexuality in general. And it you know, for some people, it probably matches up with their own thoughts and beliefs around sexuality, which is pretty free and limited, not limited. And I, for others who may come from a background who's, just has a different sense of morality or whatever, this really pushes the envelope, for that. So people that are concerned with it, I think definitely have the feeling that a lot of those type of lessons should be handled at home, under the supervision of parents, and parents' values and morals, wherever they are influenced from, ought to be the drivers of that. But comprehensive sexual education says no, we're going to have all of that happen in schools, and parents aren't going to be there to know what children are being taught, under the theory that some parents aren't teaching their kids the right things, and that kids are growing up to not have the right values or attitudes or beliefs about sexuality that is, this group that pushes it desires for them to have. And so it's pretty scary if you consider what your kids might be being taught. And we've seen a lot of examples of materials that are available to kids in schools, whether either through the library or media or otherwise, that when parents see it, they say, wow, I can't believe that my child can have access to that at school. But it's all part of that movement.
Absolutely. And Shannon, I'll just let you take the last one, critical race theory, which is called by many, many, many things, many other names.
Well, I think critical race theory is extremely dangerous because it makes student identify if they are oppressed or an oppressor. You are one or the other. And Ibram X. Kendi, who is kind of the author of many of these materials or philosophies, is the only way to combat racism is by anti-racism, by believing that it exists in every area, corner, whether you're aware of it or not. Because I'm white, I am inherently racist. And this actually goes along with some of the teacher training that teachers have been given. So it's very dangerous, and I think it also says to students, why would you try to achieve these higher levels when your circumstances would say otherwise? Why would you even try? We know that you can't. And that is, it's that victim mentality that is so dangerous. If students' lives and color are not, if they're students of color, basically they're viewed as incapable. And if you are incapable, it's because somebody did that to you. And that's the danger.
It definitely takes all responsibility away from the person.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So Sam, I'd like to ask you, have you ever felt this pressure that Shannon was talking about, to go along with a group or to conform or to think about things in a specific way?
Yeah, definitely. There was one instance where we read a book, and it was about a black family in Chicago in like the 60s, and then they were moving into a white neighborhood, and then like a guy went to them and he wanted to like buy their house from them to keep the neighborhood white. And it was more of a minor part in the book, but we ended up talking about that and about racial covenants and stuff like that for multiple days, and it was really stretched out, and it was not even us learning about the book anymore, it was learning about that. And it was talking about how black people, or black people a long time ago, or I guess in the 60s, they were kind of grouped into neighborhoods, or weren't allowed to buy houses in certain neighborhoods through racial covenants. And they then stayed in those areas, and then they, through time, have kind of stayed there, and then they're not able to pass things down to their kids. And so it inherently puts them at a disadvantage. And we were taught that, and that was definitely kind of shocking to me.
Shocking to you because?
I guess because it was a minor part in the book, and it was really stretched out and really kind of pushed into us that that's how it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Aaron, I want to ask you, like, from the perspective as a parent. So, because social emotional learning, one of the things that it does is it also, like, shames parents, into making them think, your child needs to think, and you need to think about the feelings of this other person, so it's basically, it's lowering the threshold for kids, that danger reflex that they have, or that instinct that they have. But it's also stripping parents of that same protective instinct of their children. So do you feel that?
Yeah, and we've had firsthand experience with that with our youngest. I guess it would have been a little over a year ago. He came home from school one day and he says, "Hey, I was invited to be in this leadership class." Pulled out of his academics, put into this other leadership class, and it's for kids. Fourth grader. He's trying to describe what this thing was. It was confusing to us, and we kept asking more questions. And we finally contacted the school and said, "What is this leadership class that our son was put into?" And it was a social emotional learning group that they felt that he needed some extra work in this area. So they, without our consent, without our permission, without even not trying to get consent, not even just telling us, just did it and put him in this group. And so, there was no concern for our role or our concerns as parents, or not even even if we wanted him to do it, they didn't even ask. It just happened. So yeah, they completely stripped our rights in that situation, just disregarded us.
So they just decided that your kid, wasn't empathetic enough, or wasn't,
Right.
Whatever enough, and they decided that they were going to help fix him.
And for added context, this was in the middle of all the mask wearing mandates in schools, and our son has a spine, and he said, "I don't want to wear a mask," and we supported him, said, "Then you don't have to." So he constantly was harassed by staff, and of course, he's a young kid, and so it stressed him, and so he probably had some more issues over that time frame because he was constantly being stressed, and so it was like this inflicted pain on him that caused the situation, and then they said, "Oh, well, he needs to go into this social emotional learning group so that he can be more empathetic and more compliant," and it was really manipulative, very manipulative situation.
Oh. So what's the impact, Shannon, of these ideologies actually on academic achievement?
Well, I think what Matt was saying, when we try to use our time and resources to help students group think or think the right way, then we lose academics. We lose the time for actual learning. And I also think that the discipline piece ties into losing time for academics and learning, as well as the grading pieces. So it's kind of a multi-pronged situation, I think. So, and you were saying too about just the lowering of expectations, opening our grade books for entire trimesters for students to learn something that they should have learned with a finite amount of time, opening grade books unlimited, also retaking tests until they pass, and spending copious amounts of time on things and I guess cultural popularity policies, for lack of a better term, like the SCL or the CRT, or those things that we don't need to be doing, because they really are parents' responsibility and right.
Yeah. So in Minnesota, and starting in 2025, teachers are going to have to personally advocate for the core tenets of critical race theory and gender ideology. Colleges and universities have to they have a new standard where in order to maintain their certification, they have to, make sure that teachers understand this. And the new standards require teachers to affirm positions that some people might think are extreme about, human nature and human sexual practices. But teachers are going to, if you want to teach in the public school, you're going to have to say, yes, I agree with these things. So, what implications, I'll ask Shannon and Aaron, what implications do these have for teachers and parents who might not agree with these ideologies?
Well, those things are already happening currently in the way that this kind of goes into parental rights and knowledge. I think the implications are they're going to lose teachers, and young people will not want to enter that field, especially ones with conservative beliefs. And I don't know what teachers are going to do who are currently teaching, because we're already being put in these situations where we are currently forced to take on the students' desires to be identified differently than they were born, and even keep that information from parents and pretend that that is not happening. So it is happening without parents' knowledge or consent, and administrators, teachers are going along with it. And I think that's disturbing. As a parent, I want to know what's happening. So I think it's going to keep good teachers away, and I think it's going to cause teachers to leave, and those are the things. And there's going to be a lot of dispute about those new standards having to be agreed upon.
Mm-hmm. And Aaron, what do you think as a parent, how will that impact you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't see how it does anything but create an echo chamber for one particular worldview. And so if you don't share that worldview, your options of how you want to educate your kids are going to look different. I mean, I think ultimately it's going to force more people who don't have that worldview to leave, whether they're the teachers or the staff or the parents and the students. So on a silver lining, perhaps it's a boom for private schools and homeschools, homeschooling co-ops, things of that nature, but I don't see a positive future for public schooling when it's just one narrow worldview that's permitted by law. I don't see how that turns out well.
And Sam, what does that make you feel like when you're in the classroom and you can see that, they're trying to usher you into this one way of thinking and you may not agree with it?
Yeah, it's definitely a little kind of, I don't really know how to say it. It kind of doesn't really make me feel very good, I guess. Like, I see all these things like flags and banners and posters and stuff in my classrooms, and I don't necessarily agree with some of it, but it's there, and I feel like I can't really say anything to teachers about it, because if it's in their classroom and I try to talk to them about it or argue with it about them, like, I'm in their class and they're grading me on everything, so I feel like it kind of doesn't really give me an outlet to speak on my values and on my opinions.
Do you ever feel pressure to, to write about or to express an opinion that you totally disagree with just because you know that that's what that teacher wants to hear?
Yeah, I definitely would say that. I guess in like a couple of classes, like, I definitely know that a teacher will have a different view than I do, but since they're grading me, I just want to get the best grade that I can, and so I'll write something different than what I really believe, but if I think that it'll get the best grade, then I'll just write that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all kind of been there with that one. We're gonna switch a little bit and talk about school boards and all of this, because we've all seen the clips of the angry parents at school boards screaming at school board members when they don't like the policies that they're coming down with. But school boards really seem to be indifferent to parents. It's like, So Matt, why do school boards seem to have such an attitude towards parents?
It's interesting that first of all, there's a lot of pressure to I guess to support what the school is doing. So you're sort of brought into this culture with this idea that your job as the board really isn't to rock the boat. Some of the training you get tells you that stay in your lane. Yes, you make policy, but you shouldn't get actively involved in the real operations of things. And so if you'll notice, I mean, a lot of people have commented to me about how many boards take votes that are unanimous or nearly unanimous, and why does that happen? And it's in part because as you're onboarding and you're being trained, you're really told that it's really bad if you're showing dissent. Things shouldn't come. What the board has said is that things shouldn't come up for a vote unless they've been thoroughly discussed and there's good agreement on it. And so people really believe that. I think the other is boards are not made up of people who are generally in the education professions, and so there's a belief that that the people that run our schools are the professionals, and we ought to let them do their work. And I mean, in certain things, that's certainly true, right? I myself not an educator, so I'm not really qualified to tell a teacher how to teach. But on matters that aren't directly related to that, school boards, first of all, they are often, they're always community members. They may be parents, they may be grandparents, they may just be concerned citizens, but they're participating members of the community. But there's just this pressure that you're somehow not, I've even heard it say that I don't support public schools, which is funny to me because I myself went to public schools, my children go to public schools, and I'm on a public school board. But if I show dissent, then I'm trying to ruin public schools. I just want to tell people how crazy that idea is. I mean, they have no idea how much effort it takes to be on a school board. And the idea that a person such as myself or anybody would participate in that because they don't support the idea of public education is silly on its face. But yet I've heard it said because sometimes I don't agree with the direction that our board is taking.
Well, yeah, that's the next thing that I was going to sort of address. You don't agree many times with what the board says. And you express that you don't agree. Mm-hmm. So what impact can an individual school board member have on decisions and on the community?
Well, I guess I would start on the decisions part. For school boards to act, you have to have a majority of the board vote for something. So an individual school board member has only one vote. But sometimes, at least in theory, that vote could be the deciding vote. It hasn't been the case in my tenure so far, but it could happen. So that's part of it. The effect, though, that you have on the community, I would say that I feel a real sense of obligation to the community to represent a point of view that has not been represented in the past. And so, even prior to my own being on the board, I spoke before our board as a member of the community, and my time was limited, just like it is, and that's fine. Those are the rules. But as a school board member now, my time isn't limited. I get to take the time that I choose to. And so as we talk about these different issues, I've been able to at least bring forth that other point of view. It doesn't always change the trajectory of what's going to happen on the board that day, but it's a start point to be able to get a different point of view out there and to be able to encourage other people in the community that we can make an impact, and at a minimum we're being heard, whereas many people told me in the past they didn't even feel heard. Now what they tell me is, I know we're heard, I'm disappointed that we're not making the change, but at least you're there and you're being heard, and they appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. So what impact does a raving, screaming parent actually have on a school board?
I think the main thing is it just makes it uncomfortable. I think school boards have been a comfortable duty in the past. You know, there's a lot of routine things that have to come before a board that aren't controversial, and you know, I participate in all of those votes, and there are many. I mean, the majority of things aren't controversial, even though they're important. There's a function the board has to do, and you have business that you have to attend to. So to all of a sudden have parents in the room who are angry, and you know, making their opinions known, it changes that game a little bit. It doesn't feel as comfortable as it once did. And for people who are not accustomed to dealing with that conflict, you know, it can rattle them. Like I've heard some people, not necessarily on my board, but just more broadly, I've heard board members who have said that they didn't feel comfortable. They've said that they didn't like what was being said. You know, it made them angry or frustrated that people weren't appreciating the work that they were doing. We've seen examples of board members who have resigned because they just can't handle the pressure. And you know, that is understandable. These are just real people that come out of the community. They don't necessarily sign up for that duty. But what's interesting about it is that when I talked before about the sort of shaping that goes on at the beginning, you know, the feeling is you've got to defend this position no matter what. And so when you have parents who are your constituents in front of you and they're angry about it, the feel that you should be defending the school system and not the parent is very interesting to me that it happens. You know, I think about it all the time. My job is a representative of the community. And if the school district is deserving of my defense, they'll have it. But if the parents are deserving of my defense, they'll have it too. And in the interest of trying to build a school system that is the absolute best it can be to promote excellence in academics for all of our kids, for the community's kids. And so, you know, I don't know, things are a little out of balance in that way, and that it can be intimidating.
So, Aaron, a lot of parents are afraid to speak out. I mean, they absolutely don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to be seen as a dissenter. They don't want to be called racist. Why do you think parents are so afraid to speak out, and why so many of them don't?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's people don't want to rock the boat. That's kind of human nature. But I think another thing is because you see such an imbalance of a particular worldview in the schools and generally on the school boards, the perception is that that's how everything is, and that's how everyone thinks. And so people can view themselves as being very isolated. And so to network and to figure out that, hey, there's more than just me here is a hard thing to do. So ultimately, I think it takes some courage for people to do that, because there's a lot of risk, you know. There could be risks with relationships, potentially with employment. If you say the wrong thing, the socially unapproved thing. So I think ultimately it's just a matter of having courage of your convictions. I think that's the key that I've seen for the people that I know who have done a good job at speaking up.
Mm-hmm. You know, and if adults feel this way, I'm just imagining, how do kids feel, you know, in school? I mean, how comfortable are you expressing that dissenting opinion? I spoke with a teacher for actually podcast interview, and she said, I said, you know, what about dissenters? What about, you know, and she said, well, when we have a kid who dissents, we try to guide them and, you know, lead them into the right way of thinking. So what is it like for you as a student when you're sitting in class and you don't agree? You know, number one, how do you go about finding common ground with other kids who don't agree? And then what do you do about speaking up?
I think that, like, when I'm getting taught that stuff, I just kind of shake my head, like, at the start, because it's really just like they're teaching me that and I don't agree with it, but they're in the front of the classroom, they're teaching it to us, and we all just have to listen. I think, or I guess, finding other kids that, like, would agree with me that disagree with the teacher is pretty easy. Like, a lot of the kids don't really agree, like, depending on what the topic is. Like, they don't really agree with what the teacher is telling us, or they don't really agree with what's going on. So I think, like, a lot of the kids don't really agree with the teachers, but they don't really speak up about it.
You know, it seems, though, you know, I think that, you know, there's a certain group of people in our society that understand that if you can get into the classroom and you can put this into their heads, and the earlier you can do it, obviously, the better. But you're saying like kids don't agree. I mean, to me, it just seems like most kids would agree.
Yeah, there's definitely kids that obviously agree with them, but then there's other kids that I don't really think that would agree, but like I'll have a conversation with them and they pretty much think the same thing as me. So sometimes it's a little bit like, I don't know, it's a little bit shocking, I guess, because like there is more kids than just me that don't agree with what's being taught.
Do you ever feel pressured as a student? From teachers, if you express a dissenting opinion, do you ever feel like you're being picked on or bullied or graded down?
I guess I don't really disagree that much like with teachers. Obviously I disagree like in my head, but I don't really say a lot of things to teachers. So I guess I don't really have an opinion on that.
Okay. And what would you other three panelists say to your own kids with, hey, if you don't agree with what a teacher's saying, what would you advise your child do? Yes.
We tell them all the time, speak up, speak your mind. And our kids do that, so my wife and I are very thankful for that. And my high school daughter reports the same things that you have, that there are a lot of kids who don't agree with some of the worldview things that are being taught in the schools. And so that's a big encouragement. And our younger kids actually say similar things, but it's particularly notable to us with our high schooler that she reports that. So we just tell them, say what you believe. If you believe something and you know it's right, it's fine to stand up for it. We don't pressure them that they must, but we encourage them to.
Mm-hmm.
My son as well, and he has been targeted, and he has been what I would call, unfairly treated because of his beliefs. And unfortunately, it's always viewed as disrespectful or pushing back against authority or possible anger issues or something, like especially during the mask situation. We also gave him that freedom to say no, and he was definitely targeted, definitely, and that's difficult. And like I said, many times, I think even when you're dealing with high schoolers or middle schoolers, when they are trying to present their views, I think one of our jobs definitely as teachers is how to show that in a respectful way and understand that it may appear as disrespect because they're young minds trying to learn how to do this in an appropriate way. But definitely discouraged, I would say, not encouraged by teachers to speak their mind or offer a different opinion or a different worldview. Not accepted pleasantly, I'd say. But as a parent, we say absolutely, you need to say the truth.
A couple of things that I do. One, at home, I counter the narrative, so I will tell you that. So I help to prepare my own children for what the different point of view might be, and express to them, sort of what are the beliefs of my own beliefs. Why do I do that? Well, because I'm their father, so I don't mind telling them what I think. It doesn't necessarily say they have to think what I think, but I explain to them why I think what I think. And I think the other is, I encourage them all the time to be respectful, first of all. So the dialogue among people needs to be respectful. My kids didn't grow up referring to adults by their first names, things like that. It's a little more formal, but the concept is that there's that level of respect. So at first it's about preparing them to be able to speak their mind if they want to, and then encouraging them to do it, and expressing to them why it's wrong for why a child in school should never have to feel courageous in order to speak a point of view, and trying to help them explain this is actually why schools should not be teaching political ideology and pushing it on kids, is because the environment of learning should be about exploring the ideas, not about being indoctrinated into them. And one sure sign that you're in a situation that isn't healthy when you're in a learning environment is if you're feeling compelled to say or think something. And I think that by helping my kids understand that if you're feeling that way, that's an indication that there's something there that isn't right. And then they have to use their own judgment as they age about, well, how do I handle that? But one thing they can handle is they don't have to be buy into it. They don't have to be, have their convictions changed about it. And then we'll see what happens from there. But
Remember back in the day when that was the thing, was to disagree?
yeah.
It was to push back against authority.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was the right thing to do. That was the cool thing to do. That's what we encouraged kids to do. And now that is all totally, stripped away.
Yeah.
I mean, it almost seems like, I don't know, another world, You can remember, the hippies, and that's what that's what it was all about. It was about bucking against authority.
Not conforming, right?
Yeah, not
now It's
conforming.
very much conform. Here are the ideas that are acceptable. Here are the ideas that aren't acceptable. There's a lot of name calling and labeling of people. That's just well, I've certainly seen it in this position I'm in, where I've been labeled or name called by people who have never met me in their life, and the people who have met me and would say, "What? That's not accurate at all." But yet people feel comfortable in society doing it, and it's found its way into schools. And at least an adult on an adult, that's a fair fight. If you want to mentally debate me, go ahead. I'm capable. But when you start talking about children from ages of teenage on down, it's really sad. It's not the right thing to do, and we ought to push back against it as parents and citizens. We really do. We need to.
I think it's amazing when you find people who, like you said, they may speak against you and they don't even know you, and but what's always amazing to me is when someone says something about you that's not true, and then someone who knows you, who knows it's not true, they don't say anything.
Yeah. Well, it's that fear, that fear once again of speaking out. And I think about that a lot, especially my perspective is I'm an adult, and then I'm looking at what the environment that kids in school are put into. If an adult struggles to defend a friend or somebody who they know in a scenario like that, with all the life experience you have and with all the just power you have as an adult human being in society, imagine the pressure a child must feel where they don't have any of that. And as an adult, when I'm just in my neighborhood, nobody can control me. You can't tell me what to think. But in my employer, to some degree, it's a little different. And then you think about a schoolhouse where you have children, you have adult authority figures in there, and you have this formal structure of school, and people are there who are engaging in that, and they're okay with it. They've justified it in some way. It's pretty mind-blowing to me, personally.
What about teachers who dissent? I mean, what's your feel for, boots on the ground, actually teach who they're...
If there are teachers who are willing to speak out, they are few and far in between, and they lay low, because if you don't, you will be hauled into your principal's office with someone from Human Resources, and they will talk about things that have no bearing on your performance in school as well.
Things such as?
Your social media posts, your religious opinions, your political leanings, like I said, they are things that have not happened within your classroom. So they preach diversity, many administrations, but that's in look only. That's not in thought. That's not in perspective. And that has been my observation and my experience, my personal experience.
Wow. Matt, how much authority does a school board have to actually, as a body, to push back against these ideologies and policies that might be objectionable to parents, and detrimental to students.
You have quite a bit of authority as a school board, but the trick is to be able to have, a consensus on it. So if your school board is going to be effective at pushing back against that, you've got to have a consensus, at least of a majority opinion on the board, that these things are wrong. And if you did, aside from the various new rules and laws that the state apparatus, if you will, is pushing down on schools, I think the boards would have quite a bit of authority to make change to it. You'd have to spell out specifically on a strategic side or on a policy side how you want the school district to behave or perform, what sorts of things were okay and what sorts of things were not okay, and then you'd have to come up with a way to measure that and monitor it and make sure that it's happening. And it could be done, but again, you got to have that consensus on the board that that's the direction you want to take, and that's hard. It should be hard, by the way, but it's pretty hard.
Mm-hmm. So, Sam, I know you talked about, the book that, had the minor incident in it about the, the family. What other ways do you see ideologies working its way into curriculum? I know that I was recently talking to someone about math, and they were talking about how, how using math methodology is seen as whiteness. Learning, 2 + 2 is 4, that's whiteness. And it's not so much, of getting the right answer as it is in, well, how did you arrive at that answer? So how do you feel about that? So do you or where do you see those types of ideologies or ideology working its way into subjects that have now I could see like in an English class or something like that where you're discussing social issues, but what about in like a math class or a science class or something that's totally not relevant to social issues?
I haven't necessarily seen anything like that where it would be like something is like white or black like that in any core classes like that. But I kind of would say like I'm in more advanced classes where the subject matter is a lot more serious, and it's just like pushed a lot more that like that's the actual thing, like that's the math, like that's all we're kind of learning. But in my in other classes that I've had where it's not an advanced class, there's definitely stuff like that where it's like instead of the answer just being the answer, it's like kind of the process and like how you actually got there.
When we were talking earlier, you were saying something about advanced classes and how, did you say that advanced classes were not really advanced classes? I can't remember what you said. Or they're open to everyone?
I have an English class it's honors English, but there was no option for like a higher class. Like everyone takes honors English. And so in that class, that's where I've kind of had that, like the stuff with the book and other stuff like that, where it's more like how you got there instead of the actual answer.
So if everybody takes it, why is it called honors English?
I have no idea. It's kind of disappointing because like I like to be challenged and I like to like work for my grade and everything, and that class is not difficult to me at all.
Yeah, I've heard some districts now do something that they call embedded honors. Anybody familiar with that? And it's basically this thing of what you're talking about. So all the kids take it. They call it honors, but if you need something a little bit more challenging, well, we might give you something a little bit more challenging, but everybody is in honors English. So you're smiling. So.
It sounds like everybody gets a trophy to me. I mean, what value does it have if everybody does it? Seems silly.
Like
Yeah.
as an honors class, like out of all of the honors and AP classes I've had, it's the easiest of any of them I've ever taken.
Really?
It's nothing like an honors or AP class. It's just pretty much like a normal English class.
So what would be the difference in a real honors class and the class that you have now?
A big part of that is like engagement. Like the teachers don't really, or like they don't really kind of care that you're engaged as much as compared to my other like harder AP and honors classes.
Yeah, what's happening in schools is just, it's absolutely amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So what recourse do parents have when there is something that is objectionable or harmful, or, I mean, what can a parent do? I know I spoke with a father, gosh, a couple months ago, who actually went in and said he wanted to opt his kids out
Yeah.
of any gender ideology stuff that was being taught. And they told him, the administration told him, you don't have the option to opt your kids out. This is what is taught, and this is what they will learn. So what's the rule on, or the law on that?
Well, generally, you can opt your kids out of some things. I mean, I actually, before you just said that, I might have said you can opt your kids out. So there must be some scenarios where you can't. Where I think you would have trouble opting a kid out is when these different concepts and ideas are just baked into what the school is. You know, so we do social emotional learning everywhere. So now it's pretty hard to opt your kid out of that because there's not a class called social emotional learning.
Right.
And so I think that's where it gets hard. I mean, if there's something truly objectionable, you do have a right as a parent to ask for an alternative or to opt your child out. I think the challenge with that is it's hard to do. It's hard to do. What does hard mean? I just mean you have to put the effort. You have to go to the school. You've got to do whatever it takes to opt your kid out. Maybe you can do it online. I'm not sure, but you have to go to that extra mile, which means you have to be aware of what's happening, which means you have to be already on the lookout and in the know for the fact that there could be objectionable material, because it's, ordinarily they're not going to present it to you that it is. And so I just think that it's a hard thing to do, but if for the parent who wants to, it most likely is an option, at least in some capacity, for you to be able to ask for alternative curriculums or things for your kids. Now, how practical it is, I'm not sure. I haven't tried it myself, but it could be done.
Okay. Well, you know what? This time has flown by, you guys. We are out of time. I feel like we absolutely just got started. But the reality is our kids can't read. Our kids can't spell. They're not learning, how to do math in the way that they should be. They lack basic knowledge of rules of grammar and punctuation. And they spend their time in class learning about choosing pronouns and learning that gender is fluid and that we have all these different, 153 or 125 or whatever the number is, different genders. And they're also learning that they can deny facts in favor of feelings. That's basically what our kids are learning. So I just want to thank you guys for your time, for coming here tonight. Like I said, I cannot believe we are out of time. But thanks a lot. I appreciate your time. And hopefully, people who are watching this, we have given them maybe some information that they didn't know, and have maybe answered some questions for them, or even given them some challenges that they can take back to their administration and back to their school, so that they can maybe get some answers and make some positive changes and push back on some things for their kids. So again, if you haven't listened to the podcast, you can find it at MN, that's Mike November Trapped.com. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay.